My name is Diane Brigant. I'm a Sister of St. Agnes from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and I am Professor Emerita of Biblical Studies at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. I'd like to share with you some reflections on a biblical passage that the Holy Father speaks about in his document, Misericordia Vultus. It is the document that came out in relationship with the year of mercy. Misericordia Vultus is translated the face of mercy. And as the Holy Father develops this theme in the document, he begins by saying, Jesus is the face of the mercy of God. One of my colleagues in Chicago who teaches systematic theology always says, we can really know very little about God except if you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. And that's very much what the Holy Father is saying as well, that Jesus is the face of, and he concentrates on, the mercy of God. To understand what mercy means in the scripture, one of the foundational texts is Exodus 34. And in that particular passage, the Hebrew word, when it says that I am a merciful God, in Exodus, the Hebrew word for mercy means womb love. It means the kind of love that a woman has for the child in her womb. It is not the love the child has for the woman. It's not the love that we have for God. It's the love that God has for us, that the woman has for the child. It's a very intimate kind of relationship. And the use of that word, rachamin, in the Hebrew, underscores that kind of intimacy. When we go into the New Testament, it's a translation from Hebrew to Greek. And anybody who knows more than one language knows there's never an exact translation. Because if it's a living language, the use of the language adds texture, adds nuances, adds color to the word. However, there is a word in Greek that is similar to the word in the Hebrew being womb love. And that word in the Greek is splanknon. And that refers to a love or feeling that comes from the interior. Today we would say a gut feeling. But even that phrase doesn't capture this. And just as the Hebrew word is only used in the Old Testament, in terms of God's love for us, not our love for God or anyone else or anything else. So interestingly enough, in the New Testament, this word refers to God's feeling toward us. So it's a very similar meaning, though not exactly the same. In the Greek, you don't have the sense of it coming from the womb, but it comes from the interior. And in the ancient world, the gut was the source of, or the origin of sentiment, not the heart. The heart may be more the origin of thought, but not the sentiment. So there is a story that we have in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, actually several stories, but I want us to concentrate on one story. And it's the story of the prodigal father. Now, most people know that as the prodigal son, because of his sinfulness. But I really think that story is more a story about the father than it is a story about the son. So we all know this story. The younger son comes to the father and asks for his share of the inheritance. Now, what we find in the Old Testament, when we talk about this mercy of God, this womb love of God, is God's response to total neglect and alienation from God of the people in the desert. As we find in this story, it is the son who significantly rejects the father and insults the father. Now, you don't get this word. You'd have to know about the context, the historical context. In the ancient world, and I think we could say this is also the time of Jesus, but in the ancient world, what we have in terms of inheritance is very different than what we have in the contemporary world. The expression used is double portion. So that means that the elder son, if you have 2 sons, if you have 5 sons, if you have 7 sons, the elder or the oldest son is the primary heir and gets double portion. That doesn't sound fair. It wouldn't sound fair to me because I'm not the elder. I'm the second born, not the first. And I'm also a woman, which in the ancient world, if you have a patriarchal society, patriarche means head. The head rules. The head of the society rules. And if it's patriarchy, that means the head has got to be a man, the father. But there's also what we call patrilineal. You inherit through your pater. You inherit through your father. A patriarchal society can also be matrilineal, which means that the head of the society or the clan or the tribe is a man, but you inherit through your mother. That does not make it matriarchy, it makes it matrilineal. But in ancient Israel, it was a patrilineal society. So the younger son had no right to ask for his portion before his elder son, the elder brother, I should say, got his. So right off the bat, the younger son has made a serious cultural mistake, knowing he was making it. But more than that, he's asking for his inheritance when his father is alive. For all practical purposes, he is saying to his father, I wish you were dead so I could get my inheritance. Now, in both situations, saying to the father, give me my share, when the father's still alive, serious rejection of the father. A serious error, more than that, a violation, a patriarchal custom, patrilineal custom. But first of all, patriarchy. So he has asked his father while the father is alive, and he has said, give me my share, when he should get the second share, not the first. So what does the father do? Punish him? No. He doesn't punish him, which he had a right to. He gives him he gives the son what he asks for. So that we go, the story says, he goes off, squanders it, and so on and so forth. And we won't get into details about the way he sinned. But he got so bad, he was reduced to feeding the swine, the pigs, which is terrible for Jewish people. Because pigs were unclean animals. Probably someplace in their history, there was a plague associated with pigs, with pork, with swine. And so from then on, they were forbidden to eat it. So he is so reduced, he's doing the worst thing that a Jew would do. And not even given permission to eat what the swine eat. So he has been significantly lowered. And finally, he comes to his senses, which is not uncommon. Sometimes we have to hit rock bottom before we come to our senses. That's not uncommon. And he says, I will go back to my father, realizing I do not deserve to be his son. And he doesn't deserve it for the reasons that I said earlier. He insulted the father, and he asked for inheritance before it was his time. He realizes, I have offended my father. I don't deserve to be a son, which means I don't deserve to get my inheritance. Now, why is inheritance so important? In both testaments, Old and New, as we know, inheritance is important because the land has got to stay in the family. That's why it was so important to have a son. Not because sons are better than daughters, but sons in a patrilineal society, you inherit through the male line. No son, then the line or the inheritance goes to your brother's son, goes to your nephew. If you'll remember, with Abraham and all of the patriarchs, the major patriarchs, had no son. And so Abram says, I will make Lot my heir. Lot is his nephew. It goes to his brother's line, which means you lose the land. It doesn't come back to you. Now it belongs to the other family. There's one story in Judges where the man dies and he leaves 3 daughters, and they have to go and ask for special permission to be able to inherit the land. And the elders say, fine, but if you marry, the land does not go to your husband. The land stays in your father's line. Special permission. So all of this is important to know about the seriousness of the son's failure, of his offense. Now, that's all background to the major point of the story, what I think is the major point. So he goes back to his father. He has a little speech ready. I have offended you, and I do not deserve to be your son. So he never gives the speech. He never asks for forgiveness. He never says, make me a servant. I don't deserve to live in the household and be treated like a son. He never says that. And why not? Because the father sees him as a distance. Some people say, probably he was watching all the time. The text doesn't say that, but he says he sees him as at a distance. One could ask, why is the father looking at a distance? What's he looking for? What's he looking at? I think it's fair to say, perhaps his son returned. Now, this is a story about a father. So Jesus is telling this story about a father. Which father is he talking about? Is he talking about the father in the story, a real father, or is he talking about a God? So as we read this story, realize he's talking about God's attitude toward a sinner who could not sin any worse, who could not descend any further, who finally, having hit bottom, comes back to one's senses and says, I do not deserve the righteousness of God, the blessing of God, the goodness of God. I will go back and I will recognize my lowliness and ask God, at least let me be lowly in your household. So what happens? The father runs to the son, is filled with compassion, there's the word, is filled with compassion, and runs to the son. And then the son makes a speech. Only after God, the father, has shown compassion, has shown this, filled with love for the son. And then the son makes the speech. So God is not compassionate. The father is not compassionate after we ask for forgiveness. The Father is compassionate. God is compassionate before we ask for forgiveness.
There are times we are joyful and happy. There are also times when we are sad and depressed. Sometimes we laugh. Sometimes we cry. Sometimes we become angry. Sometimes we are calm and reflective. Yes, we are emotional people. Often we express our emotions loud and clear, but sometimes we suppress and keep them to ourselves. Our wounded emotions need to be healed to enable us to live normally. We want to offer you a book written by Father Martin Padovani, SVD. It is called Healing Wounded Emotions. Father Martin is a marriage counselor, and this book is the result of his many years of experience. Some of the topics he deals with in this book are anger, anger with other people, anger with ourselves, and even anger with God. But what about forgiveness? Forgiveness of someone that has hurt us, and even forgiveness of ourselves. Then there is the emotion of depression. We know that today there are many who are living with the shadow of depression, and they do not know how to get out of it. Father Martin gives practical solutions to deal with our wounded emotions. So get your copy today. Surely you will be doing yourself a favor. Or maybe you know someone who needs a copy.
Call the number on the screen or email us. You can also get it through our website. Know your emotions and live them to the full. This book will surely give you the peace that you are looking for.
And then what does he do? He celebrates the return of the son. The story goes on. The elder son, the first heir, the one who gets second portion, double portion when the father dies. The one who has been good, who has followed all the rules of the house, who has conformed to everything, almost the opposite of the younger son. So he comes in from the field. He's been working. He's been working the land that will eventually come to him, but not yet. And he hears rejoicing, and he says, "What's going on?" And then the servant tells him. And is he happy for the conversion of his brother? No, he's angry. And who's he angry at? He's angry, obviously, at the son, the brother, which he never calls. He says, "Your son." He never refers to him as my brother, your son. And he's probably angry at the father. And what does the father say? Again, there is compassion. Everything I have is yours. You know, you work hard, everything I have. But look what he says. Look what the son says. It's almost as if I deserve what I'm going to get. Your son deserves nothing. I deserve what I'm to get. What a strong story. I feel bad for the father. Neither one of the sons is a prize. One of them works and works and works. In a certain sense, if you want to use theological language, has done everything right and deserves a reward. And that kind of thinking is not dead today. We think we deserve. Sometimes we think we earn our salvation. We earn God's forgiveness. When in fact, we earn absolutely nothing. Nothing. It's all a gift. It's all what God will give us because God is merciful and compassionate. We don't earn it. God is merciful and compassionate, as this story would say. And the son then resents the younger son, who is a forgiven sinner. The elder son, we realize, though the words are never there, this is also a forgiven sinner. The father does not lash out at him, which he should, because the son is criticizing the mercy of God. So the father says, "Everything I have is yours. Now come in and join the festivities, because your brother was dead and now he's alive." And the story ends there. We don't know whether the elder son is willing to rejoice in the mercy of God. How selfish that is, and yet how real it is. We want the other ones to be punished when they do something. Whether that punishment be, we were not invited to the party, we were overlooked for the promotion, we killed someone, we robbed someone, and we may not like this, but dictators are also the children of God, to whom God will be merciful. We're not happy with that. We want justice. We want parity. Now, that is not to say that God is not just. This story does not point to the justice of God. It points to the mercy of God. And there are two ways that God can be merciful, or two different sons or daughters. And it's son because of inheritance, not because sons are better than daughters. Two different kinds of Christians. There are those Christians who come to their senses and realize, I don't deserve the mercy of God. I will ask for something from this God that I don't deserve. And the other one is, I deserve it, and you didn't give it to me. And there's no indication that that son came to his senses. It is a son who resents the mercy of God. How sad that is. But we want people who have offended us, who have sinned against us, who have tortured us, who have been dictators. And we don't have to name names. We want them punished. And that, of course, if we don't see that they're suffering for their sins, we step in and make sure they are. That's part of our legal system. And in no way am I suggesting God is not just. But in a very real sense, they are in the hands of God, who will make sure that justice is exacted. Because whenever there is a sin, and that sin may be forgiven, there are still the consequences of that sin. We want retributive justice, not restorative justice. Retributive justice. That's the kind of justice system that we have in the United States. Not a justice system that restores the perpetrator. The story that we have here is not a story of retributive justice. It is a story of restorative justice. And that elder son could be restored if he wants to be restored, if he wants to be transformed. The sinner, the one that's obvious, who has not lived according to the standards or the rules of the household, that's one that asks to be restored, but in a lower place. But the point here is the story of a merciful God, the story of a prodigal father, not primarily a prodigal son. And Jesus tells this story to tell us how God deals with us. Now, in a sense, again, there is justice. In a certain sense, the son asks for justice, and he receives mercy. We must leave justice, particularly in this story, in the hands of God, realizing that not everything is wiped off. Justice cannot wipe off. Justice may say, all right, we forgive you, but what are we going to do about the circumstances of your sin? Using a suggestion, or at least an instance from U.S. justice, retributive justice, we might say, rather than going to jail, you must go to work. Stay in jail at night maybe, but go to work, make money, and restore what you stole. Or do something within the community that shows that in a certain sense justice is being enacted, but also the perpetrator is being transformed. But the point of the story is the mercy of God. The point of that story is the mercy of God. There are other stories that talk about the mercy of God as well. But the point of this is the mercy of God. So what is Jesus saying? If you, in this story or all of his stories, very generally, there aren't many stories, many parables where Jesus, or the person in the story, exacts justice. We may think it's not fair, but does not exact justice. Perhaps in the stories of Jesus, we identify with the wrong character. It's easy to identify with the hero in the story, or the one who is given a blessing. Now, I realize that I'm moving away from parables that speak about justice, but think of this kind of justice, this mercy of God, this splankton. Think of that as the foundation, the basis out of which everything comes. The compassion out of which forgiveness comes. The compassion out of which justice comes. And look at the stories that Jesus tells. Few of them are justice stories. All of them are mercy stories, even though the word is not used, because they show the compassion of God. Through Jesus, Jesus is the face of the mercy of God. So when Jesus is healing, why? Because he restores people. It's that kind of a mercy that restores people and brings them back into the society. When Jesus feeds, it's out of mercy, right? And brings them back into society. Just as in the Old Testament, there are several words that we translate mercy, or compassion. Even though rachamim may be the primary word. So in the New Testament, there are stories where people are shown, as we translate it, compassion. He had pity on the people. All right? But there's that primary word, which is splankton. Just as in the Old Testament, the word is only used for God, so it makes it a technical word. So in the New Testament, that word is only used for God. Only a few places. And in each case, it is, in a certain sense, showing the mercy of God through individuals. Here, it is through the Father. So Jesus preaches mercy, that fundamental relationship that God has with all of us, even if the word is not used. Now, as we go through these stories, there's always a suggestion that we too must be merciful. In this story, God asks, or the Father asks, the elder son to join in the celebration. So change your sentiments of resentment and take on the sentiments of the Father, which is primarily the sentiment of mercy. This is a significant challenge for us. Significant, particularly when we realize that our world is in such desperate need of that kind of attachment, that kind of mercy. It's in desperate need. It's in need of justice. Again, think of the crime in our city streets. We cannot live without justice. But what kind of justice are we asking for? What kind of justice comes out of mercy? Not simply punishment. It is justice, but it is restorative justice. It is a kind of justice that will transform. As we look at the elder brother, it is the kind of justice that will make the elder brother able to rejoice, able to see that our Father has been merciful. That is very hard when we want equity. And it is good, but equity that comes from what? We can't just look at these attitudes as separate and individual. They all must come out of a sense of mercy.